Hello and a very warm welcome to this Delta Energy and Environment webinar on the topic of microgrids. My name is John Murray and I'm a senior analyst here at Delta, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Julian Jansen and Matthew Myers.
Hello everyone.
Hi. Julian is Delta's resident energy storage expert and Matthew is one of Delta's latest recruits to Delta's new office in Cambridge. And together we are the team that is leading Delta's global microgrid research. And we are really delighted to have you all here today. This is Delta's most well-attended webinar, I think, of all time, so there's really a lot of interest in this microgrid topic. So before we get started, I just want to give you a brief introduction to what we'll be talking about. Over the next 35 to 40 minutes or so, we will be discussing what we mean by the term microgrids. We'll be looking at some of the applications and market drivers within this sector. We'll be illustrating some of these examples with case studies before looking at some of the market barriers, and then discussing our forthcoming Delta multi-client study looking at the global microgrid sector. So before we go into the topic in detail, just a few housekeeping things. The webinar will last for approximately 30 minutes with a further 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. Throughout the webinar, everyone attending will be on mute, but you do have the opportunity to interact with us by submitting your questions in the box. And just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, so there will be the opportunity afterwards to listen back to the webinar at your leisure. So before we go any further, I'm going to hand you over to Julian, who's going to introduce you to Delta, for those of you that don't know us.
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and yeah, hello from my side as well. Great to have you all on this webinar. Now, obviously, some of you might already know Delta. You might be working with us already, but we have a lot of attendees in this webinar today, so we thought it'd be good to just give you a brief introduction and overview to Delta Energy and Environment and our work. So, Delta EE, what we do is we help our clients navigate that transformation of the energy system. So, from a past energy system, which was based around centralized generation, commodity sales, and really where the value was captured upstream. What we see is that the energy system is changing, and it's changing fast towards being based around distributed low carbon generation, being more customer centric, service orientated, and making use of new digital solutions. So really what's happening is that the value is being captured downstream. And what we do is we help a range of clients in this sector. And primarily the group of clients, or the way we work with clients, is we work with a lot of major energy companies, with manufacturers of different technologies, including energy storage, distributed power solutions, heating solutions. But also we work with a range of clients, including network companies, policymakers, as well as stakeholders from the financial community. So this is just a very brief introduction, and obviously what we think is that microgrids will be an integral part of this future energy system, and that's why we're so excited to talk about this topic today.
Thanks very much, Julian. So let's begin the webinar in earnest. So I thought we'd start by discussing what we mean by the term microgrids. A lot of people are talking about microgrids. It's something that's come up in our research conversations very much, conversations with our clients a lot in the last 12 to 18 months. But are they all talking about the same thing? I mean, what is a microgrid? And when we've been looking at this topic, we've by speaking to people and by looking at online articles and reading white papers and so on, we've come across a lot of different definitions. And there are just 6 that we've pulled together and shown you there on the slide. And no two definitions are exactly the same. But what we have learned from all of this is that there are some key themes, some themes that are the same across different people's definitions. And we've condensed this down into a list of 5 typical features of a microgrid. So the first one here is just using our Delta cartoon here just to illustrate what we mean by a microgrid. The first one is that microgrids are really defined or restricted to a local area with a clearly defined boundary, a clearly defined single point of contact, if you like. So these are not spread out over really large geographies, but really quite local entities. The second feature is that microgrids tend to be made up of using multiple connected distributed energy resources. So that could be a solar PV system, gas engines or diesel gensets to provide backup power. It could be micro wind, and in an increasing number of cases, microgrids are using energy storage, most often batteries, as a way to optimize the operation of the microgrid. The third feature is interconnected loads. So these are local demand centers which have got your electricity demand. So that could be local industries, it could be hospitals, it could be a number of multifamily homes, for example. The fourth feature is that microgrids, to be a really smart microgrid, there needs to be some way of controlling those different assets and to optimize the operation to minimize your operating costs and maximize the benefit from the microgrid itself. So having a smart control system which can optimize the operation of those assets is really important. And finally, you can get 2 different types of microgrids, really. You can get grid-connected microgrids that are connected to the transmission grid, or you can get ones that are completely islanded. And you can get a hybrid one which is sort of can be connected but to the grid, but in the case of a grid outage it can come offline and provide on-site power in the case of blackout events. So those are the 5 key typical features of a microgrid, and that's how we define this space. Now, before we go any further, I think it's time to introduce our first poll. So this is your opportunity to give a bit of your input to the webinar, and I'll hand you over to my colleague Matt to introduce the question and the 5 possible answers.
Thanks, John. Just to make sure you guys are awake and really listening, we thought we would engage you a bit here, and we also thought it would be interesting for both you and us to work out who exactly is joining us on this webinar today. So we know that there's a relatively limited list that we've given here. Unfortunately, the software we use limits us to 5 different options. So just choose the option that best suits you. So choose between a microgrid company or a utility energy or network company, a manufacturer, and by manufacturer I mean manufacturer of gas engines, solar panels, wind turbines, etc. Are there any policymakers perhaps? Option number 4. And lastly, if you fall into none of those categories, please select the other category. So please just take a couple seconds now to choose the option that best fits where you're from, and we'll show you the results shortly. We'll give you a couple more seconds, right?
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, we can see the results coming in. I think most people have answered the poll question already, but we'll just leave it open for another 10-15 seconds. So yeah, now's your chance to get your response in. Okay, another 5 seconds. I think everyone's answered. One last chance before we close the poll. Okay, that's the poll closed. And now we can see that's the results in now. So yeah, good level of response. Most people have responded, and we can see, yeah, quite an interesting split there actually. Surprisingly few companies that call themselves microgrid companies, only 2%. About a third of companies attending would label themselves within the utility, energy or network companies. About a fifth of companies call themselves manufacturers, 6% policymakers, associations, and then about a third others.
Yeah, for those that selected other, we're very interested to hear where you guys come from or how you identify. So please let us know in the comment box if you selected other, where exactly you're joining us from, and who you represent.
Okay, really interesting, and I think that kind of demonstrates to some extent the broad appeal and the broad interest of this microgrid sector. And we'll carry out another couple of polls later on in the webinar. So thanks very much for that, and moving on. As we said at the start, I mean, there appears to be a huge amount more interest in microgrids over the last few years. It's coming up more and more often in the conversations that we're having with our research contacts, with our clients. And when I was thinking about this at the weekend, I thought, well, it'd be interesting to see what Google says to this. And so I typed the term microgrids into Google Trends, and it came up with this chart, which sort of just illustrates the increase in web searches which has come about in the last few years, especially in the last 5 years, where it's gone from a level of about 25 up to 100 in the past few months there. So kind of a fourfold increase really in Google searches for this term in the last few years. Most of these searches have come in the US, really, and we'll come on to talk about why that might be the case shortly. So a lot of interest in North America, especially, but there's also interest here in the UK and specifically in Scotland. But one of the reasons for that may be because we are ourselves based in Edinburgh in Scotland, so we might well have skewed the results slightly. But interesting observations, I think, nonetheless. So why do we think that now is the time for microgrids? What are the reasons that's driving this rise in interest? And I think really there's a number of different factors at play here. One, I think, is the fact that distributed energy resources are growing exponentially. You can see this chart here which shows the cumulative installed solar PV capacity globally over the last 10 plus years, 15 years even actually. But you can really see the growth in solar PV over the last 5 years especially. And the same can be said for energy storage as well. A really steep increase in the amount of energy storage that's come about online in the last few years. And this has resulted, of course, in prices for these distributed energy resources coming down. That chart on the right there is showing you how solar PV modules, how the costs have come down over the last 5-7 years as well. So yeah, big increase in the number of distributed energy resources and a big fall as well in the costs. Also, a third point is greater demand for resiliency. So what do we mean by this? I mean, there's been a number of high-profile superstorm events in particularly North America, which have resulted in quite extended periods of blackouts. And during that time, microgrids really came to the fore as a way of keeping the lights on, if you like, when there was extended power outages. And as we've seen, as demonstrated with the Google Trends search, a lot more awareness about microgrids and the benefits that they can provide. And finally, utilities and the utility business model. I mean, I think most people are understanding now that the conventional energy business models of centralized generation is beginning to be displaced by the move towards low carbon, renewable, decentralized energy. And for the utilities, it's almost a case of sink or swim in some cases, and utilities are going to have to adapt their business models to be able to react to this shifting paradigm. So it's almost a case of sink or swim for those, and we've seen a lot of interest in the last few years of utilities looking into this microgrid space. What are the different types and applications of microgrids? Well, we've segmented them here into 4 different types. The first in that top left-hand quadrant we've labeled grid resiliency. And so like I mentioned a moment ago in North America, the grid resiliency is probably the #1 driver actually for microgrids, especially in North America. And so keeping the lights on, which microgrids can help do. They can help provide local power in the case of widespread blackout events. Big driver for microgrids. Secondly, peak demand charge avoidance. So where you have very high peak electricity demand charges, microgrids can be a way to really shave off those peak costs, and that really helps the economic case for microgrids in some cases. Second example is islands or locations where there's a very weak or non-existent electricity grid. Often the installation of a microgrid is a good alternative, a cheaper alternative to upgrading the transmission lines. Also in these island locations, a lot of the time diesel gensets are being used to provide local power. And as we know, the diesel prices can fluctuate wildly, but also in remote locations the cost of diesel can be very high. So actually in some locations, some remote islands, microgrids can actually be a more cost-effective way to generate your on-site energy compared to the more conventional means. And of course you get the added benefit in some cases of reduced local emissions and reduced noise when you're using localized renewables such as solar and wind. The third example, industrial facilities. We'll come on to one of the case studies actually looking at an industrial facility, a mine in South Africa. But really the industrial facilities is one where there's often a need to reduce operating costs. So these very energy intensive industries looking at ways to lower their operating costs and also to decarbonize, and also in some cases security of supply is a way to minimize the risk of any power outages in remote industrial locations. And then finally, community energy examples, where the driver here is really about maximizing the benefits of local renewables. So especially with the advent of a huge amount of solar PV going in some locations, coupled with an increase in the amount of energy storage, we see community energy projects as being a really interesting example of that's driving microgrids, especially within some countries within Europe and within North America. So we've talked a bit about the drivers, about the applications. Before we move on to the case studies, we're going to have a quick second poll. So back to Matt to introduce the poll.
So here's poll 2. We would like to find out why you guys are interested in microgrids. Once again, we'll share the results after the polling is closed. Please try and vote. Everyone, let's try to get 100% attendance on this one. And so for this poll, choose the statement that best describes your interest in microgrids. The first option is understanding the threats and challenges posed to your company with the emergence of microgrids. The second option is you're in the early stages of development. You're exploring understanding microgrids as an opportunity. Third option is you're actively engaged. They will likely be very important for your business, and you're currently developing a strategy or product or service relating to microgrids. Option number 4 is you're in the market for microgrids. You developed a strategy and you're now looking for opportunities to develop, build, or operate microgrids. Once again, if you fit into none of these categories, please select option 5, which is none of the above. So yeah, if you do select the other category, once again, please use the comment box to let us know exactly what your interest is. We'd really like that information.
And yeah, we can see the poll results coming in. I think most people have voted, but we'll leave the poll open for another 15-20 seconds.
Yeah, please keep voting. We're above 90% voted. It would be great if we could get to 100.
Okay, so 5 more seconds. We've got a few more coming in. So 5 more seconds, and then we're going to close the poll and publish the results. Okay, thanks very much for your votes. And once again, we will share those results with you now. So as we can see, quite an interesting spread. So we asked 4 different questions really. 13% looking to understand the threats or the challenges associated with microgrids. Most folk, well, 39%, so about 2/5 early stage exploring microgrids as an opportunity. About a quarter of folk are actively engaged, and 13% are in the market with a developed strategy. So really, yeah, so a lot of interest early stage interest and engaged in this microgrids, but relatively few companies today actually in the market with a developed strategy. So it's really interesting that we're seeing a lot of interest, but still a lot still to go, I think, before we have a fully established microgrid market. So that's really interesting insight, and thanks very much for your responses. Okay, let's move on, and I think now we're getting to the stage where we're looking at 3 case studies. So I'm going to hand you over now to Julian to introduce his case study in Portugal.
Yeah, thank you, John. Hopefully you can all see the slides after this interesting poll. So it's great to see that the interest is really there, and that people are interested in the microgrid market. So what we'll do now is go straight into an example of a case study. And the first one we chose is the Graciosa Island in Portugal. Actually, it's one of the Azores Islands, and it's based basically by itself in the middle of the Atlantic. And so hopefully you should be able to see the screen now. So basically, Graciosa is a great example to show how microgrids are disrupting power production in a remote location. And the example we've picked here is this microgrid where it combines solar PV, wind energy, as well as battery storage to really reduce the reliance of diesel generation on the island. So to tell you a little bit more about it is, at the moment, Graciosa is about 4,500 inhabitants and an annual electricity consumption of 13.5 gigawatt hours. Please apologize, slight delay. We've got a little technical glitch on the on the poll. So it seems like you can't see the screen. We've just been informed. So we're just trying to resolve that. One second, please hold on. This sometimes happens. But it should be coming up. There we go. It's come up now. So really sorry. Please, accept. I apologize for that. So let's start again on the Graciosa Island. So this island in the middle of the Atlantic, which is part of Portugal, has been really reliant on diesel generation to provide its power supply. And actually, what we see here is that a microgrid is a great example of how we can displace that existing diesel generation and other thermal generation and increase the share of renewables. Because so far, renewable energy had to be limited to around 15% of annual generation because diesel gensets had to be constantly available. Now the solution that has come in here, and this is built by a consortium of Unicos, who are an energy storage project developer, Recharge, investor and financier of the project, as well as the battery storage the battery storage manufacturer Leclanché and wind energy firm Enercon. And really what this microgrid has created is a large base of renewable generation with a battery storage system to deal with the intermittency. So why do we like talking about this study? Well, first of all, because why was this microgrid developed? It was there to reduce diesel consumption, to reduce electricity costs, and increase renewable penetration. And it's done this. So early results show that this microgrid is likely to reduce the reliance or the use of diesel on Graciosa by around 60%. And secondly, we see quite a nice business model in place here, because this is based around a 20-year power purchase agreement between the project consortium and the island utility. While the project was partially funded by the Portuguese government, overall the savings that can be achieved are close to 2 million euros per annum from displacing this diesel generation. And actually what we think is this is a hugely replicable system and project. I mean, let's just take Europe. I mean, this is probably the worst example, but take Greece. There's around 30 non-interconnected islands in Greece alone. A lot of these are today relying on diesel generation as the core baseload generation asset. And we really see a drive towards renewable energy, and microgrids being the key enabler for it. And actually, if you look across the world, islands in many places are still reliant on diesel generation or other thermal generation. And as we're going through this transition of the energy system, microgrids have a core part to play. And lastly, we just touch upon all this, but really ultimately it's a real business case that saves the residents of Graciosa a lot of money, that reduces the environmental impact of generation. And you know what, personally, I really like it because integrating energy storage has been integral to making this work. And this is something we see happening more and more in the future, and it's an exciting area to be in.
Right, thanks very much, Julian. Yeah, Julian is, like I said at the start, our resident energy storage expert, and he gets very excited about energy storage. So yeah, any questions on that, the energy storage topic, we can ask Julian at the end. So thanks for that, Julian, and we'll move on now to our second case study, which Matt will talk you through.
So this case study looks at Cronimet's Wildcorp chrome mine. A bit of a mouthful, but this chrome mine is located in rural South Africa in Limpopo province. It is an off-grid application of microgrids, and it was commissioned in 2012. So just interestingly, this microgrid from concept to commissioning only took 6 months, so really, really quick turnaround time. That's great. And just looking at the microgrid itself, it's got a total capacity of 2.6 megawatts. It's got 1 megawatt of solar PV and 1.6 megawatts of diesel generation. The diesel generation is comprised of 2 800 kilowatt diesel gensets. The solar PV has allowed one of these diesel generators to be taken offline during the day, whereas previously they both had to be running. So one of these diesel generators still runs during the day, basically to modulate up and down to account for any changes in the weather or any clouds blowing over or anything like that. And the fact that one of these diesel generators can be taken offline means that the other one can also go through short-term maintenance during the day, which is really great for the mine. And 60% of the daytime power needs of the mine is provided by the solar installation, so that's great. And currently, Cronimet is realizing a 24% reduction in annual diesel fuel usage, so also a great saving for them. So looking a little bit more at Cronimet, so Cronimet Holding Company in 2014 had a turnover of 2.9 billion US dollars. Solea was the company that developed this microgrid that was responsible for the solar installation and the controller installation in 2012. And interestingly, Cronimet bought out Solea. And now Cronimet Power Solutions is what this company has become, is one of 59 subsidiaries of Cronimet. So why was this microgrid developed? Well, the main reason is because diesel is expensive. Diesel costs are one of the largest operating costs of such a mine that operates off-grid. Looking at the business model, here's a nice graphic that shows you how basically the main value of this project is realized through diesel savings. And it has a total payback period of just 3.6 years. This was when the oil price was slightly lower in 2012. However, that payback period has extended to no longer than 5 years, so still a really great payback period and a very valuable project. In 2012, it had a net present value of 2.3 million US dollars over 20 years, assuming an 18% discount rate. So using renewable energy such as solar really helps stabilize the company's energy costs, as well as hedge against future oil price hikes or fluctuations. So how replicable is this project? Well, pretty replicable. I mean, if you just look at Cronimet's buyout of Solea, I think that's very good evidence in itself. Cronimet Power Solutions has about 300 megawatts contracted to date of these such power solutions, and they have a further 3,000 megawatts in their project pipeline. What do we like about this microgrid? Well, it's a simple microgrid. It has very real savings, very quick payback time, And it is just generally a very good example of an off-grid microgrid that realizes very real savings and is very applicable to many different cases. So now I'll hand back to John to go over through our next case study.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. Yeah, so now on to our third and final case study that we'll be talking through today. And this one is based in Ontario in Canada. It's the Algonquin College. So there we have a picture of the college and where it is. And this is a project which has been developed by Siemens. And yeah, it's being developed ongoing, but part of the microgrid's already up and running, and I think they have plans to develop it even further. So it's quite a modern, quite timely example of one of the most recent microgrids. The site itself, the college or the main campus, has a peak electricity demand of about just over 4.5 megawatts, and the majority of that can now be met through the 2 times 2 megawatt gas CHP units which have been installed, and the grid supplies the excess. But I mean, if you bear in mind that 4.6 megawatts is the peak demand, then you can quickly imagine that actually the gas CHP systems are more often than not providing the full electricity supply for the campus. And there you can see that the CHP is supplying 86% of the peak demand, and will probably provide even more higher percentage of the overall electricity demand. But it's not only CHP. They're also incorporating solar PV systems, energy storage in the form of batteries, and more recently, I think they are developing or installing electric vehicle chargers really to maximise the benefit of the electricity that's being generated on site. And this is a really good example actually of a case study which is using a very intelligent controls and software to maximise and optimise the operation of this case. On this next slide here, you can see just a very basic schematic of the project. And the plan, I understand, is for Siemens to invest over $50 million in the project over the next 20 years, and that includes the cogen system, the solar PV, the energy storage, together with the electric vehicle charging infrastructure and the microgrid management system itself. And ultimately, this will result in savings of 3.7 million annually, with a 48% reduction in the overall running costs. So why was the microgrid developed? So yeah, fundamentally it was developed to reduce the campus energy expenses, so less exposed to rising energy prices. The second driver was to keep the power flowing during central grid outages. So it's another example of a microgrid which has been developed with the benefit of grid resiliency and keeping the lights on when the power goes out. But also in this case, because it's a college, one of the real benefits of this project is the ability to offer students and faculty and the faculty itself new learning and research opportunities about the benefits that microgrids can provide. And so I think we'll find that the college will become a real hotbed of research within this topic. So it's a really good opportunity, I think, to really harness and learn about the benefits of microgrids for the students coming through. And like I said, it's really showcasing, from Siemens' point of view, the capability of an intelligent microgrid management system to really optimize all the assets and to maximize the energy savings and minimize the operating costs. In terms of the business model, it's actually an ESCO model, so an energy service company model between Siemens and the college. So Siemens will own and operate the microgrid, and the college itself benefits from lower energy prices. And that should also mean that there's no upfront capital outlay for the college. So they pay for it during the operation and consumption of energy on site. How replicable is the project? Well, I think this type of project is very replicable. It may not be exactly the same design from one microgrid to the next, but the concept and the way that you operate solar PV together with gas engine CHP, for example, with electric vehicle charging, battery storage. This is really the sort of thing that we're seeing coming through with that intelligent control system. We see a lot of opportunity for those sorts of projects in the future. And that's sort of what we like about it as well. I mean, it's a really great example of how the microgrid can combined with agile and smart software, can achieve minimized emissions, increased efficiency, and reduced energy costs. Okay, so that's us gone through the microgrids. Now time very quickly for our third and final poll. So over to Julian for this.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. So yeah, we'd like to introduce our third and final poll of today. I think it's great to get a bit of interaction going. So the question we're asking here is really to understand what you think will be the greatest enabler for the microgrid market over the next 5 to 10 years. So we've showcased a couple of examples, and John will shortly give you our view, but we want to get to understand what you think. So do you think it's going to be the price reductions in different components, including solar PV, battery storage, other generation technologies? Do you think it's going to be new innovative business models and maybe software developments such as blockchain? Do you think it's going to be primarily driven by regulation and policy? So it could be about meeting renewable energy targets. It could be more encouragement of community energy, for example. But let's face it, regulators are always a bit slow to move, aren't they? The other 2 points we'd like to raise is, do you think it's going to be around the increasing competition and promotion marketing of microgrid solutions, or is it more around the increase of renewable energy? So it'd be great if you could tick one of these 5 answers. If you don't agree with any of these, actually, drop us a quick line in the question comment box, and we can try address that later on or after the webinar with you. Looks like we have quite a lot of undecided people, actually. We've got about 60% of you voted so far. Be great to get a bit more responsiveness here. Maybe you can't decide. I know it's quite tricky, but we'll be closing the poll soon. Also looking at the time. So we'll give you another 5 seconds. So if you can cast your vote now, please. Great. So we'll close the poll and we'll share the results with you now. So what we can actually see is that not everyone's a bit undecided, but actually the greatest number of people, so over a third of you, think it's going to be about price reductions. And I think that's a very obvious point, and John touched up on it earlier, talking about PV and battery storage. But actually, what we see is that around a quarter of you do think that innovative business models coming into the market and that they really will enable microgrids. Well, obviously, to a lesser extent, you think regulation, competition, and more intermittent renewables will become the core drivers. So I think there's a clear split here between the cost reduction or the business models. So it'd be great to see what we think here at Delta. So I'll hand over to John to wrap up this webinar and share some of our views and findings.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I mean, that's really interesting, actually. So there's obviously some difference in opinion in terms of what people think are going to be the main enablers for microgrids in the future. Okay, before we get towards the Q&A session, so we want to have a few minutes at the end for questions. I mean, we've talked about a lot about some of the benefits and the opportunities associated with microgrids, but that's not to say that there aren't a number of challenges and key questions, unknowns within the sector itself. And we've picked up a few of these over the research that we've been doing and the conversations that we've been having with our wider network. I mean, of course, one of the big things is, these things are pretty capital intensive. There's a lot of kit that goes into a microgrid. And that can be a real challenge when it comes to the upfront capital costs and the price that people have to pay to develop a microgrid. Of course, in different countries there are different regulatory barriers. The policy changes from one country to the next. Even within countries, the policy can change from one part to the next. So to what extent can microgrids benefit or be hindered by the regulatory situation? And these microgrids, they can be pretty complex beasts. I mean, there's many moving parts. Although if you're a fuel cell developer, you might say that there's no moving parts. But yeah, there's many different components, and they all have to work together and be optimized into a well-oiled machine. So how do you best do that? Unclear value proposition. So who is the customer for microgrids? How do I make money from these things? In some cases it can be quite clear, but in others it's less obvious. How to make a microgrid stack up, and what are the business models that can enable that in the best way. Different folk are trying to understand what their role is in this space, what other players are already doing in the marketplace, so what's the competitive environment and who can I partner with, and where should I play? So is this a North American only opportunity, or are there opportunities in emerging markets? We've seen some case studies, of course, in the one in Africa and the one in the Azores, but where are the opportunities? I mean, to what extent is there a big opportunity in Europe, for example? So those are the sorts of questions that we've come across a lot over the last 12, 18 months from our research contacts, and as a result of that, we have decided to undertake a multi-client study looking at the global microgrid sector. And so I just want to spend a little minute talking to you about what we will be focusing on within this multi-client study. So the core focus areas are listed there on the slide. We'll be looking at the microgrid applications and case studies. We're going to be looking very in depth at the player landscape and the technology perspective. So who's doing what and with what technologies. The third point will be looking at business models in the value chain. So what business models are coming through today, and also innovative business models for the future, and how can you really make money from microgrids? What are the key markets? So which countries, which regions of the world is going to be the biggest opportunity, not just today, but in the next 5 to 10 years? How is the market going to evolve in different parts of the world? So really looking at the future opportunity for microgrids will be a core part of the multi-client study. And this multi-client study is underway at the moment and will be published in April, so in a couple of months' time. The scope of the study, geography is global, but looking at key focus countries. We've talked about the applications already. All distributed power technologies we'll be considering within the study, including gas engines, fuel cells, solar PV, and so on, and also looking closely at the role that energy storage can play to enable microgrids to take off. What are the benefits to you, the buyer of the study? Well, this study will help subscribers to develop their own business models to maximize the value to you and the appeal to customers, help you to develop the right strategy for your company, help you to understand the opportunity in different parts of the world, to identify partnership opportunities with key players in this microgrid space, and will help determine where to develop these propositions and within which applications. So like I say, we've had a lot of interest in this topic. We're carrying out this study, and we've got a lot of interest in the study, but we're very welcome for any questions or comments that you have on that, and we're very happy to talk. On the topic of multi-client studies, we have recently published one on flexibility within the UK market. So that slide just shows you some of the questions that this study looks at. I'm very happy to answer any of your questions on that. But now I think we've come towards the end of our slide set, and we've got a few minutes left to answer some questions. We've seen a number of questions come in during the course of the webinar, so thank you very much for those. Yeah, we've got a lot of questions actually, and we won't have time, I'm afraid, to go through them all. Yeah, let's see how we get on. There's one here with respect to energy storage, so I think that's maybe a question for Julian. The question is, how important do you think energy storage price reductions will be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and you know what, I think it's going to be absolutely crucial aspect to the microgrid development, because storage is an integral enabler, so to speak. So what we've seen is already that turnkey energy storage systems, so using lithium-ion batteries, have come down over 50% in price over the past 5 years, and actually some of our latest analysis shows that we expect these price developments to continue. So there's already talk around new lithium-ion turnkey solutions looking at a range between $500 to $600 per kilowatt hour, and actually there's new technologies coming into the market as well. So actually only last week Northern Power Systems announced their cooperation with EOS Energy Storage, and they're saying they can provide 4-hour turnkey solutions at a price of around $400 per kilowatt hour fully installed. So if you look at these cost developments, it really shows you that energy storage as part of a microgrid is absolutely crucial. And I think at those price points, we're starting to look at very competitive solutions. Actually, we've got another question just on the slides, and I think as John just said at the end, yes, we will be circulating the slides as usual to attendees, and if you would like a copy, drop us an email as well, and we'll respond to that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Julian. Yeah, we will be distributing the slides by email as for a copy of the presentation. Okay, we've probably got time for one or two more questions. So there's one come in about the, well, I was referring to the case study on the mining in South Africa, and a question around the business model. They want to know more information about the business model. So I think that's one for you, Matt.
Okay, great. Well, these are exactly the type of questions that we will cover in more depth in the Microgrid Multi-Client Study. So please do get on that. So what we see from the mining sector, just to cover some of the more prevalent kind of business models we see out there, a lot of these type of installations seem to be diesel solar installations, and there are four main business models that we've picked up on thus far. The first being self-generation, so that's a good example of Cronimet in this case. So that Cronimet's White Corp Pro mine there, they essentially developed and built the installation themselves through the buyout of Solea. We also see capital sale of solutions to other mines. So this is Cronimet's power solutions going around and selling these type of power solutions to other types of mines or whoever could make use of this type of diesel solar installation. There is also power purchase agreements where Cronimet could install, or whoever could install such a solution, and then the customers only pay for the energy that they use. And then lastly, a very interesting business model that is only really relevant to mining is there is a power purchase metal swap agreement. And this is basically companies, for example, in this case, such as Cronimet, get paid in raw ore rather than currency. So Cronimet, the form of payment would be a mine providing another mining company who have implemented the solution, such as Cronimet, with ore. This helps hedge against local currency risks, and in fact it takes local currency completely out of the equation, which is quite attractive for lots of multinational companies.
Yeah, we've had more energy storage related questions actually coming in, and it's mainly around different technologies. So we've had a couple of questions here saying, well, you've talked about lithium ion, but actually what about other technologies, including other battery technologies, but also thermal energy storage? And I think all these questions are very valid and very good, and I think there's definitely a lot of space for different technologies to play in the microgrid kind of ecosystem. So to give you some examples, we definitely see flow batteries as a potential application within that segment, so probably more so than in a lot of the more mainstream energy storage markets we've seen in Europe. So that's one technology. There's new, more novel chemistries coming out, specifically targeting longer duration storage, so kind of 4 hours plus systems. So these are much more suitable to microgrids than maybe 1 hour lithium ion systems. And obviously thermal storage is also something that could potentially come into play. There's very few specific examples we've come across in our research, but actually if you look at potential new energy systems on islands, for example, that might make use of district heating applications, etc., that's something where this could play as well. And if you've got loads of questions on energy storage, feel free to reach out, and you can also subscribe to our energy storage service. So I mean, today is about microgrids, and we can talk about that topic, about the storage topic, another time.
Yeah, thanks very much, Julian. So I think we've run out of time now for today with the questions. There's a few more that have come in that we haven't quite got the time to answer, but we will come back to you if you ask a question. We will come back to you offline by email or by phone. So yeah, thanks very much everyone for your attendance and also for your participation in the polls. I hope you found the webinar enjoyable and insightful. We will be holding more webinars on this topic in the coming months following the publication of our multi-client study on this topic. So please feel free to keep an eye out for those. And finally, like I say, please email us if you wish for a copy of the slides. So thank you very much for your time, and we wish you a very good rest of the day.